Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
I want to take you back to 1985, Robin. It always sounds longer when you say it like that, 1985.
It does.
Scruffy-looking young bloke walked into a university classroom in Gippsland and told me everything I need to know about using computers in education. His name was Jeff Richardson. What's he been up to recently?
Goodness gracious me. Well, just a little bit before 1985, he joined a group called the Coodabeen Champions on the Triple R radio, I think it might have been called. And the rest is history. 39 years later, the Coodabeen Champions still punching it out. And the man who is the glue, it keeps it all together, Jeff Richardson, good morning to you.
Oh, good morning to you both. I want to hear more about that class.
Class is an interesting word. It wasn't very classy. We were at... you were coming down to the Gippsland Institute of Advanced Education, it was known in those days, and you did a bit of tutoring work, and you were my tutor.
I hope I taught you something.
Well, I'm no longer a teacher, if that helps. But here I am allegedly doing radio, so I suppose you taught me something.
Marvellous.
That's good. Great to have you aboard, and we really appreciate the good work of your friend Ian Cover for providing the phone number. So if it goes all wrong, it'll be his fault. And good morning to you, Cove. He'll be listening as he's punching his way up through Werribee.
Just going past the auctions in Laverton.
Yeah, probably.
Here's a piece of research I would like you to do at some stage, Jeff, because you're the man who's got the contacts. How much do you reckon the cars parked in those auction yards are worth in total?
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
I think lots is my first guess.
A huge amount. Have you ever bought anything there?
No, but I did sell a car there once. We got $300 for it, and I think we did well. A charity ended up with the $300. But yes, I know it's intimidating, I think would be the word.
Yeah, it's very intimidating. I've been a couple of times, thankfully, with people who knew what they were doing. It's not just cars. Like if you're in the market for a tip truck or a bulldozer, that's the place to go.
And I think you've got a future in advertising. If you're looking for you're straight into that nicely. Well
Richie
played,
brothers.
It's an entertaining day out to go and just observe what happens. Because I don't know whether you're allowed to use brand names on your show, but when
yes, we are.
Past that place, I still think of it as Fowles, of course, which it isn't anymore. It's been sold to a South African company. Can't remember their name.
Mannheim, I think you'll find.
That'll do.
Well done.
Hey, Jeff, you've been doing this for 39 years, driving into the studios of a radio station, not always 3LO or 774 as it's called now. Is it any less exciting now than it was 39 years ago?
That's a terrific thing to ask because it's one of those yes and no things. Yes, of course, it's something we've been doing for a long time, so we've developed a certain sort of routine about how we do it. So that sort of initial excitement is no longer there. But the thing, as you would know, sitting there in a radio studio, when you open the microphones and you don't know who's on the other end, but you know whoever they are, they're very, very close. And it's a very personal medium, radio, and people allowing you the privilege of coming into their kitchen or car or wherever they're listening to you is always a terrifically exciting thing, just connecting to people in that way.
And do you have, you certainly have a running sheet, I imagine. You have regular segments and the like, but what happens in between appears to me to have not changed in the 39 years. You just sound like you make it up as you go along. Is that really the brief of the group?
Yes, there's a bit of both. As you know, if you've listened to our show, there's a certain sort of underlying structure and some degree of like we know the people who come on our show as guests know in advance that they're going to be coming on. But we try to, how am I going to say this? We like a natural conversational style, so we don't work to a script. So because the troupe has been doing it for a long time, and we all know each other very well, we're used to each other's cues, so I think we're able to have a conversational style that actually works on the radio without becoming tedious for the listeners. Now, that's not really by design. It just sort of turned out that way, and we've been very lucky.
Because I think the other thing too, Jeff, is that It's not been the exact same group of people all the way through. I mean, His Honour is now back just as Simon, as I understand it. And, you've had people come and go. I think having, I guess, a critical mass of people who work together, you can introduce people like that along the way.
Yes, I suppose we've got a core group now who've been doing it for without much change for about 25 years. But we sat down the other day and added up all the people who've been in some sense or another a regular on the Coodabeen since 1981. It was more than 50 people.
Wow.
Which I was staggered by. But I suppose once you get to a certain age, you realise you've met everybody.
Jeff, Neil touched on Simon Wheel, an interesting name. Now, without being negative towards the group as such, he was lost to the show and the listeners lost an important part. The fact that he's come back, it adds something. He seems to have some sort of connection to the group that I guess goes back to when you all knew each other as youngsters in 1981.
Well, that's right. He's a founding member of the program. He's one of the people who had the original idea and was there right from the start. So Simon's style and his way of looking at things is integral to the way we do it. And of course, he had a long period away from the show, which he really didn't have a choice about. It was just the way it had to be because of his other obligations in his career. But it's tremendous having him back. And yeah, as you say, he slots back into the on-air group as though he's never been away.
I'm fascinated to go back, I'll say 40 years, because presumably there was a conversation before 39 years ago. I'd love to know how the idea came about. I mean, Rob and I, with Two Blokes Chatting, we sat round one day and said, we seem to be two blokes and we're chatting. Let's call our show Two Blokes Chatting. Our start as a podcast, interestingly enough. Most people go the other way. What was the spark that said, hey, I know what we'll do, head down to Triple R and do a radio program?
Well, part of it was that back then, in the early 80s, things like the station you're on now were very, very new. Up until then, the broadcast spectrum had been very, very locked up. There were a certain number of stations. There was the ABC and then there were the commercial licence holders. And there were no new ones, and there was certainly no way for ordinary members of the community to broadcast in any way at all. So the landscape that we're familiar with now, not just with radio, but with television, where there are community outlets and people can make shows, and this is all before the era of podcasts democratised it all even further. But it was all very, very new, and it's a little-known fact. It was the last piece of legislation that went through the Commonwealth Parliament in 1975 before the Parliament dissolved for what's become known as the dismissal, was the legislation that allowed for the spectrum to open up and for there to be community radio stations. It was the very last piece of legislation passed by what was called the Whitlam government. And it sort of took a few years for that legislation to work its way through the system. But by the early 80s, you had stations like in Melbourne, certainly 3CR and 3RRR, and there were stations like that right across the country that were suddenly able to go on air. So there was this awareness that you could do a radio show, whereas 5 years earlier you couldn't. And I remember quite distinctly, Simon and I were going to the football. It was Anzac Day, and this was back in the day when, remember Anzac Day used to be a split round?
Yes, yep. And other teams got a crack at it as well, he said, as a grumbling Fitzroy supporter.
And I remember it was one of those sort of late autumn days where the leaves were damp underfoot. We were walking across Yarra Park. We'd parked the car and we were walking over. And, of course, on the way into the program, to the show, we had the car radio on and we were listening to what was then the standard footy shows of the day. It was Harry Beitzel and all these legends of radio commentary. But Simon and I were just saying how one-dimensional all that was. Even though we loved it and we listened to it, it had almost no humour in it at all. And we knew we were about to walk into the MCG, stand behind the goals in standing room, and probably spend most of the afternoon laughing at what people around us were saying as the game was going on. And we were saying, why can't that reality that everyone who goes to the footy knows somehow get represented the way footy's talked about on the radio, because it's that dimension of it simply wasn't there at all. And both being young and overconfident and inherent show-offs, we said, why don't we do our own show? and of course, back then, that was what community radio was doing. So I think on the Monday or the Tuesday after the Anzac Day long weekend, I rang up Triple R, and Reece Lamshed, who was then the manager, took the call and said, yeah, sounds like a great idea. Want to come in next Saturday? And so we did.
Brilliant. Now,
we didn't realise then that we would not stop.
Absolutely.
In amongst the humour of Australian rules footy, there is the passion, and you were a spoilt teenager being a Richmond supporter, 5 premierships before the Coodabeen started, and a bit of a drought started from that time on until recent times when you're back in the frame. But the game itself, Coodabeen champions, hasn't changed much in those 39 years. The game has changed almost to the point of being unrecognisable. Do you still love it like you did in 1981?
Oh, I think so. There's something about Australian football that's it's very hard to explain to people who don't know it, and people who are from outside the football world. But if it's one of those things that if you're born into it, you grew up in it, you recognise what it is, and it's not just a sport. Yes, it's a sport with a set of rules and all of this, but it's so much part of the fabric of Australian life in those parts of Australia where Australian football is played. And I don't think that's the fundamentals of that have changed very much. The changes that have come have all been to the good. I think football's become more inclusive. A whole lot of things about the way football interacts with society is better than it was then. But it's got a certain magic to it that I just think that it's unmanageable. And no attempts by people outside the community level of football can extinguish, even if they were to try.
Because it's interesting, I'm a former Fitzroy, now Brisbane Lions member, have been for 30 or 40 years.
It makes you very rare, because a lot of Fitzroy people wouldn't buy into the Brisbane Lions.
Oh, until about October 2001, there seemed to be an influx of them. But
now look, I'm about to drive into the ABC building now, so I'm hoping our phone connection will hold up. We'll just see what happens.
No problems. But you go to Brisbane and you go to the Gabba and see the difference in the way people watch footy there. That underlines that thing that you were talking about. They don't get it up there. They go to watch a sporting event. They don't live the religion almost that a lot of folk down here do.
Yes, it hasn't got the deep community roots that it's got in Tassie, Victoria, Southern New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia. That's for sure. I think that's the biggest challenge for the AFL teams in Brisbane and Sydney is that the market is so different, and how do you create that out of whole cloth at the community level?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the secret to the success of you guys is you've never worried too much about the game itself. You've focused on the characters and the characteristics of the game that is sort of the central piece to what you produce, which is why it's so A, appealing and B, unique.
And footy games come and footy games go, and you win and you lose, and in the end, those things don't get remembered as much. Kevin Sheedy said a lot of interesting things, and you can learn a lot from it. He said a really interesting thing to me one day. He said, winning the premiership doesn't get you anywhere. And when you think about it, it's exactly right. In our lifetimes, look at how Melbourne and Hawthorn had these near-death experiences when they came close to extinction. And Hawthorn, only a few years previous, had been this unassailable premiership-winning machine.
Yeah.
Jeff, you...
There's no guarantee in footy that your club and your community will be sustained based on the scoreboard.
One of the great parts about your show is the last little segment, and you're the man that holds that together. The callers that come in, the Cove tells the funny stories about how Harry Beitzel used to think they were real people in the early days.
Aren't they real?
Aren't they real? But do you have a particular favourite amongst that group that have become regular members of your show over the journey?
Yes. But there's some that haven't been heard for a long, long time. I very much liked Pat from Port Adelaide. I don't think he's rung for a while. He's a pommy. I like him a lot.
Digger remains my favourite, and I'm really pleased that he's in recent times he's returned. We thought he'd gone to God, but it seems that he's still up and about, and I think that's an important thing for football.
Very important. The whole thing with Digger, of course, was Collingwood's self-fashioning themselves as eternal victims. So when Collingwood broke through for that premiership in 1990, that almost thought, well, how can Digger's life have any meaning once Collingwood have been successful? But he survived, so who knows?
Hey, we better let you go, but I did notice on Facebook this morning on the Coodabeen Champions Facebook page that there is an event occurring on Monday night, coincidentally, and I love the way that you elbowed your way onto our program to promote it. Do you want to have a quick crack at promoting that so that the listeners can take part in that event?
Oh, thanks. Yes, this is an initiative that's been going throughout the pandemic called Delivered Live. If you Google it, you'll find it. You type in Delivered Live. And we were lucky enough to do one about a month ago. There have been a lot of other music performers and things that have done Delivered Live shows. And they're what you call a webcast, a TV show that goes out on the internet. And ours is on Monday night, 7:30. And you just got to sit there with the computer and click on, and you can watch. And it's been a way of getting live entertainment out there during the shutdown. And we're delighted to be able to be doing another one, which we are on Monday night. So if people are interested, you Google Delivered Live and you'll find it.
Excellent, Richo. Thank you very much, A, for this morning, but B, for the 39 years of wholehearted commitment to our great Australian game. You've made it so much better for we fans who get frustrated and annoyed. We know that there's always a laugh on a Saturday morning, and we look forward to many more years of you boys doing the same thing. So I appreciate what you've done, and thanks for your time this morning.
Oh, thank you. All the very best.
It's an honour being your curtain raiser, Richo.
See you, mate. All the best.
Bye.
Oh, they're good folk, those Coodabeens. I just love the way they remain grounded, humble. There's no chance any one of them's got their head jammed up their own posterior.
No, absolutely not. And I think in so many ways, you think back to 1981 when they started. You've got the shows that have effectively been created because of it. And you look at the front bar, and the front bar to an extent is the Coodabeens on TV.
Yep.
And there might be one or two aspects of this particular program that are not dissimilar in terms of their intent. Certainly not their execution, but their intent. No,
you're quite right. And I just like the way it proves that you can just be consistently good at something. And really, the format hasn't altered in all of those 39 years, or whatever it is. So there'll be a big year next year, 4-0. Goodness gracious, what a great celebration.
And it's the sort of thing I love to be able to go back and walk into the MCG on Anzac Day with Richo and Simon and say, guess what's going to be happening in 40 years? You're still going to be doing radio. And by the way, you're going to be doing this thing called a webcast. And when Richo said that, your eyes spun. You got no idea what that means.
I've got no idea. I'm going to give it a whirl, though.
Yeah, why not? So for those who, you can either look up Delivered Live on Google or go to the Coodabeen's Facebook page. That's where I saw it this morning. I typed Coodabeen Champions into the Facebook today to say that we were going to have Richo on, and within 3 minutes there was an ad on Facebook for that event tomorrow. They're not checking up on us at all.